Hi folks, with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the Western world globalist push to get rid of juries in courts of, or supposed courts of law anyway. Now, the argument that the globalists take, and they're using their typical methods of infiltration, getting journalists that are on their payroll to put out hit pieces against juries and the concept of juries. They're saying that juries just can't handle the complexity of most cases, and therefore, why do we have juries when they don't even understand what's going on? What we need is the learned judges to make the decisions, legal decisions, as to who should go to prison or who should go to the electric chair, or those sorts of things. Who should pay? Who should get fined? Who should be set free, and so on and so forth. Now, our juries, the argument also is that the jury system isn't perfect. So if we haven't got a perfect system, why would we want to use it or continue to use it? That rather misses the point. Are judges infallible and perfect? Well, then we need to get rid of judges. Politicians are infallible and perfect. Well, we need to get rid of politicians. Is your local mechanic infallible and perfect? Well, then we need to get rid of mechanics. I mean, how far do you take this argument? The idea that that juries should and must be perfect or be dispensed with in itself is a nonsense argument. But let's go through it now. Yeah, I believe juries should stay. That's my sort of opening position on this. And there are a number of reasons for this. For initially, juries were a good break against the class system. The judges came from a particular class of people, say in England, for example, and we could be looking even at revolutionary or pre-revolutionary America or post-revolutionary America, for that matter. But the judges tended to come from a certain class of people, and they were rarely not so. And these people believed that the lower orders were a threat and a danger to the stability and continuity of government and the state and administration and so on. They believed them to be slightly better than animals, and they had to sit in judgment of them. And always believing that the riotous mob was always around the next corner, ready to make mischief. So there were certain attitudes that the judges had. You could call them the aristocratic class had. Now, this didn't mean that they were all of that view, and didn't mean that they all weren't, or some weren't, trying to apply the law. Remember, the codification of law at the time, we would say, was quite unsophisticated and vague compared to today in certainly a lot of instances. And also the amount of cases that the court had to arbitrate or litigate back in the 1700s, 1800s, for example, are very different from the sort of case, and much fewer, and with different levels of complexity. So there are certainly some differences, but the jury system was a good break on aristocrats condemning to death the common people. And the jury, they couldn't guarantee the juries would all be sophisticated people. And the middle class and the bourgeois class, sort of, if you like, in the day were maybe 10% of the population combined. So the chances are very high, as you looked at gathering a jury, that you would have people that just weren't in that bourgeois or aristocratic class. So the jury would, and there are a lot of laws that had lifetime imprisonment or hanging. The penalty was death. But when the penalty was death, the courts really struggled to get the juries to convict. Even if the judge would say, "Look, this case has to be the death penalty. You got to convict here," the juries would still come back with a not guilty verdict. Not necessarily because they thought the guy was not guilty, maybe not as guilty as the court was pursuing or the state was pursuing, but the penalty was death, and they weren't, or life imprisonment, or either one, and juries just weren't prepared to convict on that basis. they believed that the penalties were too severe relative to the crime. Now, whether or not you say, well, hold on, that isn't that itself an advert to say the juries should be got rid of, because they're not applying a judgment that is consistent with the crime that maybe is even proven to their own standard. But they wouldn't convict if the penalty was death. This left the door open back in the times. A lot of people being committed to being transported to Australia, for example, or Botany Bay, as it was called, and old Sydney town, and so on. Even though the crimes, we look at it today and say, well, gee, that doesn't sound like much. They were crimes to terrify and deter rather than to punish. And there's a difference in those. For example, if you steal, the proverbial loaf of bread, then you can be hanged for that. Not because the crime warrants hanging, but because they wanted to. Remember, there was no police force at the time, so they wanted to have massive deterrence. So if you do get caught, you're going to swing from the end of a rope. So do you really want to run the risk? Was how the law was conducted. As a police force came into operation, then the deterrent was being caught rather than the severity of the punishment. Nonetheless, the juries were there and they provided a useful break. We look back today and say, well, gee whiz, thank God for those juries. Otherwise, a lot of just people that committed misdemeanor level crimes would have gone swinging from the end of a rope, and that was, well, at the time it was deemed as excessive, and we would see it excessive today. Now, if we look at can juries be corrupted or hand-picked or stacked? Well, of course they can. If we look at the conviction of Donald Trump in New York on a basic, invented bookkeeping misdemeanor level sort of thing, then they could stack a jury with that, even though the penalties to be prescribed would have bankrupted Trump. So enormous were they, and so now it's a very clearly, manifestly politically motivated legal case that brought against that stage candidate Trump, and evidence that was less than compelling, and a judge that was manifestly activist, and still they could get a jury to convict. Now, I don't know how you do that. What were Trump's legal team doing? Why were they not, vetting the jurors, more closely? How is it that you could get 12 activist jurors, all of whom hated candidate Trump? Is that even possible? Anyway, it was on a random pick of people. They must have purposefully, I believe, picked an activist group so that only the only jurors that could be picked were from the activist group. So they must have and that needs to be investigated, by the way. If there was that conspiracy to do that, the people who did that, I believe, need to go to prison. Anyway, the jury convicted. So clearly you can stack a jury. Now, looking at the quality of jurors, are they in fact too stupid to understand key issues? Well, probably. It depends how you pick the jurors. Now, do you pick jurors based? Do you give them all an IQ test, for example? So, well, if you flunk the IQ test, you're no good as a juror. If that were the case, then people that would get high IQ grades would be the least likely who want to do jury duty, because they got better things to do. They got important jobs. They've got this, that, and they've got so they would deliberately flunk the test just so they didn't have to do jury service. On the other side of it, if people are going to have their liberty taken from them by the state, put in prison, for example, or even the electric chair, should there be that filter of a jury? So you have to satisfy ordinary people off the street that the crime did take place, and is that a desirable filter, even though the people may not really understand the technical details? Now, with something, say, like a dramatic murder, then where Billy Bob used the sledgehammer to do this, and that, and so there's lots of blood and gore and drama and people screaming, and then that probably suits the reality TV nature of some of the simpler-minded jurors. But nonetheless, it's still a filter against state power, and that to me is the critical issue here: filtering against state power, the overuse, the overreach of state power. where the state can just politicized judges just make up their mind and say, well, you have to, judge gets a phone call, so we have to find Billy Bob or Jimmy Jack or whatever guilty, and send them the fuck to the electric chair. That can be easily done where the state has no filter and where it's accepted practice that you put activist judges into the. Now, whether the judge is activist along class lines, social power lines, gender lines, race lines, it doesn't matter. But as long as you get activism, which is considered acceptable, which it is now all over the Western world, activist judges are really the baseline now, and which shows you how far we're in terms of jurisprudence, how far we've gone down the gurgler on that one. Juries are, I think, essential. Now, there's been some sort of kind of reality TV programs popping around recently which talk about jury selection, and they have like sort of fake juries to listen to evidence in a legal case and so on. Typically, they get something nice and dramatic, like a dramatic murder. Then they'll throw in a twist of, it's she was a lesbian, or he was gay, or he was from an ethnic minority or something. So they want to throw in the twist. Now, in one that I saw recently, all the supposed legal experts, the ones who are pontificating on the finer points of law, were all black in a white country, and then the so-called sort of experts running the narrative, if you like, backing narrative as the show went on, they were from minority groups, and the only white guys making a comment was gay. So there's no straight white. So straight away you understand where this program's heading. They're not heading in the area of law. And I think they attempted to denigrate the idea of the jury. So the jury presented with, this was an English program, or one of them was. There were some others I looked at as well, but they were all low IQ, working class, London cockneys. They I think he's guilty. He's geezer. The geezer's guilty. I think. So they can't pronounce their THs. They can't pronounce their H, and they they can't seem to pronounce a lot of words properly, and talk in a funny sort of rhyming cadence, and none of them sound like they're particularly bright, and there's a nice mix of non-white people in there, and feminists, and IQ 80 feminists. Now, they're steered by there's the judge, and there's the lawyers, and as long as the evidence is kept very simple and in small bite-sized chunks, they seem to be able to grasp it. And the technical aspects of things, particularly in terms of forensics or a sequence of events in a timeline, then that they struggle with, and which may in some legal cases be critical. But you're talking about very basic people. Now, do you want them making the decision? And they cast it that the person who's being charged is the straight white middle class male. When I say middle class, I mean he's not aristocratic, he's not working class, he's well spoken, probably went to a decent enough school. He's he's got his own business, which is doing pretty well, and that sort of stuff. So he's in that type of position, and he's being judged by low IQ. He's a higher IQ guy, the one who's accused. He's being judged by low IQ working class people who've never known anything but struggle, and that type of stuff. So do you want that? So how do you do the jury system to make it viable? Does it need to be changed? Should it be left as it is? Now let's come to the issue of the judges. Over the last 25 years, the globalists have ruthlessly and relentlessly pushed for activist judges at all levels, whether it be magistrates, judges, judicial registrars, pushed for junior judges or senior judges, pushed for activists at all levels. And the the training schools, the legal training schools, schools of jurisprudence all over the Western world heavily preach the idea of, social power and ideology and oppression of the minorities and straight white males and Nazis and all this sort of stuff. Heavily pushed that, and so half or more of all the judges now in the Western world are all rabid activists who believe and have been taught and trained to say, well, the facts kind of don't really matter. What we need is ideology here. Now, that militates directly against those groups presumed to have social power, straight white males, and ensures that they will always be treated as Nazis that don't deserve legal rights because they have this imaginary social power. Now, to what extent that permeates through all or most of the jury? For example, if you have a jury made up of gender studies students, they probably always send a straight white guy to the gallows, to be hung. But others may see it differently. And as long as juries, that you've got a spread in the juries of they're not all low IQ working class, they're not all street floor sweepers or something, then black floor sweepers, then you'll get I think a more likely of a balanced outcome. But that a jury can be stacked again, I go back to the Trump case in New York recently, or a year or so ago, whenever it was, where they clearly were able to 100% stack the jury. So that the administration of the courts and the administration of justice, that too can be corrupted to make sure that only a pool of activist jurors are available to be selected. So that needs to be considered. But on the issue of juries, I think we should strongly resist the idea that the globalists want to get rid of juries. It's the same way that the globalists don't like elections. It just gets in the way of their power. They don't like clearly codified law. It gets in the way of their power. They don't like having to run through accountable government, which is why we have a vast NGO structure. Accountable government gets in the way of their power. They don't want it, so they find ways around it. Similarly with juries, juries prevent their power. They can't just arbitrarily lock up anybody they want to, who they don't like. Juries get in the way of that, and therefore I think we need to keep juries, with safeguards against jury stacking, of course, which will be the next step the globalists will go to. If they really can't get rid of juries, they'll find a way to stack juries. And so there need to be protections there. But this is what the globalists want to do. Juries get in the way of their power and they want them gone, and we must oppose that. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.